Last week, or a couple of weeks ago, actually, we did a very interesting analysis of Hansi Flick's high line, and most of you loved it. The comments were great, the feedback was amazing, so we decided to come back to you with a new video, and this time we'll do a what-if scenario and do the 4-3-3 formation and how Hansi Flick could apply this to his team and whether it will actually help Barcelona.
Everybody's crying about the high line. Everybody's saying that it's not working anymore. Everybody's saying that we need changes, and we have seen that. So it's a what-if situation, and we fully understand that Hansi Flick believes in the 4-2-3-1. So in all possibilities, it's not going to change. So this is not so much about what he has to do or what is the right thing. It's just a scenario that if there was a 4-3-3, what we think would be the best way to go about it. What would Barcelona look like in a 4-3-3 formation, and would it help with some of the challenges that we are seeing?
So here we are with the board, and what I want to do first is, obviously, I want to go through both formations. I want to go through the 4-3-3 because that's the end goal. But to get to the 4-3-3, we first have to explain what is happening right now. And at the moment, as we all know, Hansi Flick is playing in a 4-2-3-1 formation. And there is a reason for that, right? There is a reason for that. He's not just made up that formation out of nowhere. That is his formation of choice. And there are things, obviously, that this formation does really well. Now, looking at this, obviously, what you have here is you have the normal back four. This is the same in the 4-3-3 and the 4-2-3-1. And one could argue that one formation and the other are actually extension of themselves. The big thing about the 4-2-3-1 is the double pivot right here, right? This is the most special thing about this formation, and it's these two players right here. So this is the unique aspect that gives you a well-balanced attack, but also gives you more stability in defense. And this is exactly what makes this formation so special. It's the balance. Because when you look at it, you do have players in each of the zones. So horizontally, you cover the pitch really well across the zones, but also vertically, you have at least two players in each of the zones, right? Or even three players. Okay, the number 9 can go either way, obviously. But you have multiple players per zone, and that means the field is well covered, and the team is also well balanced going forward, but also going back. However, there are some things that this formation needs to have in order to actually be effective. This double pivot right here, they're obviously a shield, and they're always obviously players that can ease progression. Because if the ball is with the center backs, they will have these two options, and they can make diamonds like this, for example. So this center back can make a diamond with these three players, and that theoretically gives him enough options to pass the ball forward. Even if the center back is not as good on the ball, he should, in theory, have a lot of options to aim for, and that should make it easier for him to actually do that task in possession. Now, the problem is you need to have certain profiles, and you highly depend on these two players. They need to be excellent on the ball, because if they cannot really use their ability to evade this pressure, you're stumped, because they are your only link. They are the only ones, basically, who can progress the ball and who can keep the ball moving forward. Player quality, at the end of the day, will always beat any tactics. And in this case scenario, these two players need to be of the highest quality. And Barca having Pedri and De Jong, for example, in these two roles, it just lends itself nicely to this formation. The other thing is obviously the number 10. The number 10 gives you access to this area. The number 10 ensures that you always have a player between the lines, and you have this extra attacking impetus, if you will.
Why Flick likes it? Because it's extremely dynamic. It creates a lot of attacking overloads, which is how Flick loves playing. Now, the problem that we have in this season, our hold-up person or the striker, which is Lewandowski, his ability to press or his ability to sprint back when we are on the defensive is limited. And that causes a lot of issues, because when you have 10, which is mostly Olmo, let's just call Olmo for the role that he plays, becomes compromised. Because then you have defenders on the counter. The space between Olmo and that double pivot is about 15-20. And that's a long distance. So when you are caught on the counter and you're outnumbered because you're one against two defenders or three defenders that are coming at you, this space, this middle space that you have between the 10 and the double pivot is where they kill you, which is where our midfield becomes completely non-existent, right? It's very easy to bypass the entire midfield setup, and then you are on 1:1 with the high line, right? One pass, and then it's 1-to-1 with Tech or 1-to-1 with John Garcia. And this is the problem that we have been facing. If this system has to work, your nine has to press like an insane person. Not just the
Yep.
nine, the two wingers have to also press insanely, which gives cover to Olmo to do his job. And when he does that, then the space between those two lines gets much more compressed. And then we don't see the problem that we are seeing this season. And this is why we thought that one way to mitigate that is move that double pivot into a single pivot. Now, there are complexities about having a single pivot, which is maybe Frankie but that's what would come with a 4-3-3. But this has benefits to mitigate some of the personnel problem that we have. When it becomes into 4-3-3 and we go into this single pivot and the space becomes a little bit more manageable.
I think you explained it really well, because when you do have this formation, a 4-2-3-1, it does create two distinctive units. It creates the attacking unit, which is the four players that we have, two wingers, number 10 and number 9, and creates the defensive unit, or the unit that stays a bit further back, which is the double pivot and the back line. And this should not be happening. If you want this formation to work, this number 10 needs to move really well. The number 10 is the key here, because number 10 connects this side of the pitch to this side of the pitch. And if you don't have this, then you become a very disconnected unit. And you don't want that in football in general, because if you are disconnected, the holes will appear. And as Dev explained earlier, this is where the opposition can hurt you. So what will happen if we, instead of this, had something more like this, right? So we had a 4-3-3. What does that change for Barcelona? I think the very interesting thing is that we saw this against Girona. You had Frenkie, you had Pedri, and you had Casado on the pitch at the same time. And for the first 15 minutes or so, up until the first goal, actually, we saw how effective it can be. We saw the good things of the 4-3-3, because these three midfielders, they didn't have a set position. They were not rigid. In a 4-2-3-1 under Hanif Click, we do feel rigid at times, because this double pivot in a 4-2-3-1 stays here and moves in this area. Of course, they will push higher up once the possession has been moved to a higher zone. But generally speaking, the 10 will be very free in the final third, meaning here, but it won't be free to go here or there as he seems fit. Now, that might be due to the player themselves deciding, okay, I need to stay up here, but also it might be due to a Flick's instruction that says, okay, this is the area you will man, and you will not move from that area as much. Now, we don't know, obviously, what's happening behind the scenes, but what we do know is that this situation is very common for Barca, right? Two units with gaps in between. And then what that means is that when you're pressed man to man, in a very aggressive manner, which has happened to Barca multiple times, right? In this situation, you don't have a way out, because your number 10 could be dropping here to create this overload, obviously, and create this triangle, for example. And then the ball is not easily, but the ball gets to go up the zones more easily than if the 10 is over here and not participating in the build-up. So I think when you specifically face the man-to-man pressing, this is beneficial. Having that extra player who can drop and command this area and assist these two players, because we do have Pedri and De Jong who are exceptional on the ball, who are exceptional against the press. But if you're not playing through them, and if they can't escape the press, then you need this extra player, and this extra player can make or break the game. In a 4-3-3, for example, this becomes much more dynamic, because let's say we're playing with a 4-3-3 like this. So what happens in this scenario is you want the goalkeeper to be on the ball. Now, why? When the goalkeeper is on the ball, he has the whole pitch in front of him. He is facing the pitch forward, and he is down the middle. He can go left, he can go right, he can go long, he can go short. The opposition player who's trying to press doesn't know where this guy is going to go. Maybe he's going to go here, maybe he's going to go there, maybe he's going to go long. But he doesn't know, so he's very hesitant at first. Now, the number 8s are crucial in this as well. 4-3-3 needs movement. It needs interchangeability, because if these number 8s are very static, it invites pressure on top of them. And now when they receive the ball, they already have a man on them. Now, when you're a Frankie or a Pedri, maybe sometimes you can wiggle your way out of that pressure, but that's not guaranteed. But if this 8 is very dynamic and does a slight movement, which can be going back, going forward, and then going back again. This is the point where the markers can be lost. And then the goalkeeper plays the ball very quickly. And Barca need to play quick football in a 4-3-3 because now he's created maybe a second of separation from this marker. And that second is enough to immediately pass the ball here and then drift back into space. So it's all the 4-3-3 is all about this dynamism. It's all about interchanging positions and moving well. And these two number eights, they would do that, right? They would go back and forth, they would rotate, they would switch places, they would go up and then go down back. And that's the way you actually handle these high man marking presses is by losing the markers. It's by creating separation by using the timing and movement really well. Now, obviously, this means that the players themselves need to be really good at those things. But luckily, when you look at the profiles that we have in this midfield, so Frankie and Pedri and let's say Casado, or maybe Bernal or Gavi in the longer term, right? These players are more suited to be in the deeper areas and then playing in tight spaces, maybe interchanging positions, maybe communicating really well and gelling together really well. They're more suited to this than to this, right? If you have a player who's only here and never down there and only waiting for the ball in sporadic moments, if he's a moments player, Barca lose a body in here. And that matters, especially because now teams are trying to press us. Teams are trying to be very man marking against us because we're not finding ways out of that press. And why are we not doing that? Because we're not exploiting the free man. So the solution is find the free man up here. And what does that do? That invites verticality. If you don't want to play through these players who are tightly marked, and we can't blame Tech, for example, who might not be the most comfortable on the ball, to be playing into marked players. He doesn't want that because that means the chance of failure of a missed pass or a misplaced pass is higher. So he goes for the less risky option, which is always going to be far away from his goal. So that's why this scenario invites verticality, while this invites more dynamism, rotation, and then playing out of the back. So the 4-3-3 thrives when you can go zone by zone. And to do that, obviously, you still need quality, you still need ability, you still need the profiles.
You talked about the press. So it's four people and they're quite wide. Two passes can take out four pressers at the same time. One
Yes.
goalkeeper, one central center back, two passes, and your four people are just taken out of the equation completely. And then you have a double pivot trying to deal with that situation. Whereas in 4-3-3, your pressing structure is 3 and 3. So you
Yes.
have one center forward guy and two wingers who are pressing, right? The defense has to get out of that press. And even when they have to contain with another three midfielders. So it's 3-3 versus 4, which is gives you numerical superiority. And because you have that numerical superiority, you can press in a much more effective manner. But at the same time, you're not running. Yeah, you're conserving energy to a large extent. You can also do zonal formations if you want and just mitigate situations. And that is sometimes what we miss because last season, what we were seeing is that Lamine was pressing, Rafinha was pressing, and Leva was doing some phenomenal hold-up play. And that was
Yeah.
giving the support that was required. But right now, I don't know what has happened to Lamine. Maybe he's just not well, but he has not been pressing for a while. Rafinha is obviously out. We don't have any cover, right, when the opponent is playing from the back. And they can just bypass our first line of press, our second line of press, and our double pivot in just about two passes, 2-3 passes.
Mhm.
And then we are facing turnovers. There are combinations on the left flank and the combinations on the right flank that will become crucial for us
Yeah.
to defend when out of possession and then attack when in possession. So when you think about these combinations, which are the best combinations?
So that's the beauty of the 4-3-3. There are numerous things that you can do with it. So let's say the red side will be Barcelona, the green one will be whoever the opponent is. And I think that one of the biggest things that you can do right off the bat, we already saw the combinations to escape the press, which will be vertical movement or the opposite movement, interiors, which is they go up, they drag the marker up, and they quickly go back down, which frees them up. And then the combination is the simple one where the ball goes to the midfielder and out to the fullback, who is the free man because this guy needs to jump. This guy, there'll be a couple of seconds before he reaches his marker, and by that time, Barca have already played out. So this is one of the things that you can do really well. The other thing is with a single pivot, the fullback and the wide center back and number 8, you can create this diamond. This diamond is exceptionally good at playing out of a high press. Obviously, they can be man marked. They can always be man marked. But if the opposition is so adamant on man marking, there's always going to be a free man somewhere on the page that you have to find. Because now what happens is the opposition is going to tilt towards the one side of the pitch, and that means that our free man are somewhere else, right? They must be somewhere else. And the trick here is with a diamond, it gives you so many options. And again, I will say this again because individual quality will always beat any tactics. And Barca, in most of their games, especially in La Liga, they will have the individual quality over their opponent, meaning that even in this situation where you have 3 players here covered, because in our scenario, they are man marked, right? But still, even if that happens, if this guy jumps here, again, another diamond forms itself immediately, right? Another diamond is here. So you have these diamonds already across the pitch. And now, again, Barca can quickly shift the ball and progress the play. This is how you can escape the press. So I think these combinations out wide or down the middle are crucial because it creates so many connections and it creates so many possibilities for every ball player to have because none of these players is isolated in any of these scenarios because there's always at least 2 options for him to aim for. If we look at this from this perspective, this guy has 3 options here, the fourth one being the goalkeeper potentially as well. So he always has more than one option to pass to. So if one option is blocked, even if 2 options are blocked, he still has an option to go for. That's where the 4-3-3 is a possession-based system, is because it relies on you having solutions on the ball, but also taking those solutions very well. So this guy can pass here, here. This guy is covered. He can pass here or even attempt this, even though this is a bit more risky, but he has options constantly. And when you move up the pitch, the situation doesn't change much. Now, one of the requirements, however, would be overlapping fullbacks, because I do think that when you have only one striker, what happens is that he has a huge area to command, right? He can get very isolated. Can you imagine Lewandowski having to man all this area and man the box by himself? So what teams usually do in a 4-3-3, they invert the wingers to give support to the striker, because now you have 3 players here. And that makes it a little bit easier to access the box and to have threat inside the area. But if you do this, you lose the width of the wingers. So as a domino effect, these 2 guys will obviously have to push up, or maybe just one of them will have to push up. Now, the obvious drawback, there's no coverage in that area if the ball is lost. If the ball is lost over here, the opposition can immediately attack the area behind the fullback. That's always going to be there. And what teams have done over the years, they try to adapt to this. Pep, for example, what did Pep do? Instead of having this fullback overlap, he had the fullback invert. So what happens then is he creates a double pivot, artificial double pivot in possession of the ball, and it gives you solidity here. And now, instead of wingers having to invert, the wingers can stay wide, but now the 2 midfielders can push slightly higher up. And what you get is the box midfield. Very well known box midfield for Barcelona. But instead of having the winger, which Xavi used to do, Xavi created a box with an inverting winger. Now you have an inverting fullback who creates the box with the rest of the midfielders. And this is one of the ways to create a very solid foundation, because now you have a back 3. You have a double pivot artificially made by the fullback inverting. You have the 2 number 8s that still push higher up, and you have your wide presence through the wingers instead of having the fullbacks overlap. And that is not to say that the 4-2-3-1 cannot do that. Every formation is just a formation on paper, right? So every formation can swap through different structures throughout the game according to the needs of the team. Now, the only difference is some of them require more rigidity, some of them require more flexibility. With Flick, we have not seen a lot of flexibility in terms of creating these different structures in possessions to tackle specific tactics on the other side of the pitch. And I think this is one of the ways to do it, because he tackles the number 9 being isolated, but also tackles another weakness of the 4-3, which is the number 6 being heavily isolated sometimes because it's only one man trying to cover this area. And if this number eights are not really good at tracking back or maybe helping this number six, he as well can get isolated. Because Dani Olmo, we're not pointing fingers, obviously, but Dani Olmo, what he did a lot is he was set on being in this area and not being in support of his players at all times. And that creates a big problem, obviously, for Barcelona.
If you really love football and want to understand how the game builds up, that was a brilliant example or exposition of how things work out. But in 4-3-3, if you actually fail your press, then you can fall back on a 4-5-1 mid block very easily, because then all you need to do is Rafinha and Furman, probably, they need to be mindful and they need to track back. Lamine gets a little bit of time, and Kunde needs to know when he needs to sprint. Balde obviously holds his position. And if you do that, you are immediately in a 4-5-1 mid block in less than 5 seconds. And that gives you massive protection when you are facing press on the counter, right? If you have a high press and
Yeah.
Frankie drops between the two center backs, then you have a three build up, right? Which we
Yeah.
can't do if we don't have a 4-3-3. If it's a mid block, which we often face, and your Pedri and Olmo drop, then you have a 3-by-2 in the midfield, which means you have numerical superiority, right? And you can counter and you can create those pockets of space with Olmo, with Ferran making those runs, with Lamine inverting. And then if you want to go aerial and long ball, and you have a Rashford as a nine, or Leva as a nine, or even Araujo as a nine, it gives you a clear direction with adequate defensive protection on the way, where you don't lose your attacking bite, but at the same time, in case there is a counter, you have adequate ways to save the situation.
You do, yes. And I think this is a good segue into actually explaining some of the defensive things, because this is where we struggle a lot, right? This is where the most criticism comes from, is the defensive phase. And how can Barca actually be a bit more stable in defense? It's not always about the formation, because obviously if you play a 4-3-3 in possession, it doesn't mean that you'll play a 4-3-3 out of possession. Those two can be very different structures, and Flick usually, even though we play a 4-2-3-1 at times, or most of the times, doesn't mean that we press in a 4-2-3-1. So it needs to be said that if you press in a strict 4-3-3, so let's say the red is Barcelona and we are pressing this way, so towards the green in a 4-3-3, so you do have your back four, you do have your three midfielders over here, and you have the forward line over here. There's a couple of issues that normally you will have to face if you press in this manner, and that's the lone striker having to press two or even three players if the goalkeeper is involved. Because now all of a sudden I have to choose, okay, who do I press? If I press this guy, does he pass immediately to this guy? If I press that guy, does he pass to this guy? So it's not easy being a number nine who has to press in this situation, because we do know that we don't really have any high pressing number nines or number nines that can do this consistently throughout the whole game, nor should they. This needs to be added as well. But what needs to happen for this number nine, he needs to be very smart in his timing, and he needs to be very smart in his movement, because physically he cannot be at two places at the same time. Flick does keep it in mind as well. It's one of the reasons why he prefers to drop the number nine here next to a player, number 10, obviously, and then press with the wingers inside. But let's say that's not the case in this scenario. Let's say we are pressing in a 4-3-3. So what do we do here? There's two traps, obviously. The first one being this overload in the first phase. We've explained that. And how do you mitigate this overload? So physically, you cannot, unless you push these players forward, but then that leaves these guys free as well. So let's say we're not doing that. The number nine, what he needs to do is, he knows if he presses this guy, the most likely scenario is this guy will just switch the ball to this player. And we know that information in advance. So this is why football can be like chess, is because you have to think a couple of steps forward. So he knows, number nine knows that the likeliest pass is going to be just a switch to the other side. So instead of just charging this guy, what he will do is he will curve his run, right, like this. That closes off this area of the pitch, theoretically, right? The timing needs to be right and the movement needs to be right. But in theory, it closes off this area of the pitch. And now that means that the opposition has to play towards their own right side of the pitch. And this is why curving your runs and movement and how you move is crucial. But also, it's crucial to time it really well and choose my type of movement really well. If our pressure doesn't work, what happens is these two wingers can easily, to your point, drop a bit deeper. Now we have a more stable 4-5-1. And this formation does one thing really well: it protects the center really well. So in this situation, you have a very compact unit. It also lends itself nicely to jumping from the defensive middle block to a high press, because it's much easier now than, for example, if you press from a 4-2-4, because now the middle is not well protected, right? The middle, you might have man to man here, but the goalkeeper can play, and there's a numerical inferiority in the middle as well. So it's much easier to jump from a position of advantageous middle zone than it is from this position right here. So the 4-3-3 can easily transition to a 4-5-1 and create that stable middle zone of the pitch. And I think for Barca at this moment, it is crucial. But do you have the wingers who are willing to defend in the block? Do you have wingers who are willing to track back? Because this fullback in a 4-3-3 can easily be overloaded. What if they have a supporting fullback who overlaps and tries to double up your fullback, and then your winger doesn't want to defend and track back? You will always have this 2 versus 1, which happens to Barca often. And what do Barca do? They instruct one of the double pivot midfielders to go and help. But what does that do? It creates a massive overload in the middle of the pitch, because you can't have players in two places at the same time. That's where defending, pressing, dueling, all of that is a very collective thing in sport, in football especially, because if this guy doesn't want to help your fullback, you will always be in a disadvantageous position.
I was thinking that given the game state or given the kind of personnel that we have, it might not always be feasible to do that because of the injuries or because of who we have on
Yeah.
the pitch. But there are a couple of other things that we can do on a 4-3-3 when out of possession. One of them
Yeah.
is we can do a 4-1-4-1. And
Yeah.
that can possibly sometimes work because depending on the kind of players that you have, it might be beneficial at times to fall back on a 4-1-4-1 to have two lines of four, basically, but also have that attacking threat to just carry a counter or a transition in play. The other one that I was thinking about was also the 4-5-1 defensive or mid block we have gone through, but there is also the 4-4-2 block, which we can also deploy in a particular situation like this. And sometimes Flick does use 4-4-2, but in different scenarios of the game. But
Yeah.
if we had a 4-3-3 as the baseline and we had to fall back like 4-5-1, classic, if it works, great, because you have enormous, like 9 people behind the ball and you have that solidity. But if you can't do that due to wingers capability, fullbacks capability, what have you, and we want to shift to a 4-1-4-1, or we want to shift to a 4-4-2, how would that play out and what are the benefits of that?
If you do have a 4-1-4-1, which is okay, the red now, that would be the line of four. This will be the one midfielder here, the four here, and then the number 9 up top. Again, obviously, this is a formation that lends itself nicely to jumping, going to a high press from mid block to a high press. It does this well because it still retains this numerical parity in midfield. You don't have to lose a man. But then again, the same thing happens. You need to be very smart and very quick in your movement here. Because whenever you have just one player over here, he's always going to be outmatched. Numerically, he's always going to be in a tight spot and he will have to do miracles to actually get the ball. But doesn't always have to be the end goal doesn't always have to be to get the ball. It can be to disrupt. It can be to stop an attack, and it can be to buy time to regroup and go into a more settled phase if the high press has failed. You need to have profiles for both of those. So a 4-5-1 and a 4-1-4-1 are very similar in nature because the only difference is how high is this player, right? Is he more here or is he there? Or is this line deeper or higher? That those are semantics sometimes. So sometimes you can't really tell the difference. But let's say that this guy is the screener or the destroyer who mans this area, and basically he tracks the opposition number 10 or whichever player ends up in this between the lines zone. This guy then needs to be, to your point, Dev, the right profile because he needs to be the screener. In a 4-3-3, we have two types of number 6s. We have the destroyer types, and you have the dictator controller type of number 6. This guy needs to be able to track this area and man this area. We don't exactly have that player. Yes, it could be Frankie. Frankie is very good at covering ground, even contrary to popular belief, but he is the guy who covers a lot of ground. Physically, he can do that. He can go up and down the pitch, or he can cover large distances easier than a Pedri or a Casado can do. Bernal could do it as well. Bernal also can eat ground, so to speak, in these situations. He needs to be the screener ahead of this back line. He needs to be able to command this area and maybe track the runners, which Frankie doesn't always do the best. It needs to be said. He needs to track the runners, because often what happens with Barca is teams will no longer aim for this guy to attack space. They will aim for this guy to attack space from a slightly deeper position. Why? Because it's much more difficult for the offside trap to work if the run starts here. If the run starts beyond the back line, then it's much difficult to catch them offside. So I would say that this guy would have a lot of responsibility in a 4-1-4-1. But again, all of that pressing is always collective. So even if this happens, you will inevitably force a high line. You cannot have this without a high line. You cannot jump from a mid block to a high block if you retain a deep back line. We talked about this in the last video. The high line is a necessity when you are pressing, and Barca will always want to press. I think that's Flick's idea. He spoke about this multiple times. He's not going to give up on the high pressure just like that, because it enables so much of what Barca want to do in and out of possession. So inevitably, you will have players pushing up and trying to regain possession higher up the pitch collective. It needs to be something that the team does in unison. And regardless of whether we are deciding to press for a 4-1-1 or a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. At the end of the day, it won't matter the formation, because the dynamics will inevitably change in the game anyway. But the players themselves need to be able to execute this at the level required.
We probably covered almost all the options that are possibly there in terms of the out of position plays, in position plays, where we have challenges with the kind of profiles that we have in Barcelona, and where it can help in mitigating some of the challenges that we are seeing. If you have some pointers on this, right, or any of the formations that we have seen, or you disagree with us or agree with us or have a different point of view on how it can be, do not hesitate to call it out on the comments, and we will love to create that for you in a video or something like that. And as we go on, because we want to do more of this stuff. Those of you who love football, tactics, soccer, formation, you guys will love this content.
This is the bread and butter of the Any Tactics channel, and we want to do more of this. If you are enjoying it, please let us know so that we can keep doing it. We can keep adding things. We can keep improving. And maybe, as Dev said, have you guys participate. If you have any counter arguments and say, okay, Dom, you missed a play there, you did something wrong, tell us, and we'll reenact your scenarios as well.
I hope you enjoyed this one. Please let us know in the comments of anything else that you would like us to see as we start building on the series. We'll do it throughout the year. We're super excited. And till then, stay safe. Take care.